The news cycle around the presidential debates is spinning so quickly right now that I'm nervous to even say where we're at, because I am sure that within the next couple of hours, by the time I upload this YouTube video, things will have changed. I will say we have not gotten to election day yet, and we have not had a second presidential debate. Whether or how these will even happen is still a mystery. But given the amount of attention that has been paid to the possibility of a second debate between Biden and President Trump, whether that's going to happen, how it's going to happen, my burning question is, does it really matter at all for how the election itself will go? In other words, is it going to really change anybody's minds at this point? Or is this just like we're paying attention to political theater the way we're waiting for the Super Bowl to happen to see if our team wins? And if it does in fact change the minds of voters, whose minds is it changing? The undecided voter, the voter who would already be considered decided but just doesn't want to vote at all? Why do debates even matter at this point in time? Everybody complains about them, so why do we still have them? These are all questions that I had. I decided to look for a political science expert and pose these questions for him. Before we get to that, don't forget, you can support my work in the description. There are links for PayPal and Patreon, but it also helps to just like, share, and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for notifications when I upload new videos. Let's get to this. We're going to talk to Dr. George Hawley at the University of Alabama. Here he is. For the American public, and of course people are paying attention to it, but when it comes to the attention of their actual vote, like what they're going to do, does the debate really matter that much at all?
At this stage, I would say probably not. I don't think that there are that many persuadable voters still out there in the electorate. That is, people who are genuinely undecided. However, in elections that can be very, sometimes the difference is made on the margins. But to what I think your general point is, that perhaps there is more sort of media hype about these debates than perhaps they warrant in terms of their substantive significance. I think there's some truth to that, but we have to remember that we do have plenty of 24-hour news providers who need stories, and a debate provides an amount of drama that is often missing from some of the more banal aspects of American politics. So I think that is playing a role into why we see such a heavy emphasis on presidential debates.
Okay, when you look at some of the research around the undecided voter, I've read that might be, I don't know, a 10 or 11%, but that there's a far larger majority. It's still a minority of voters, but it's far greater than the undecided voter of people who just don't vote. So is the difference for a campaign really getting the people who are already essentially decided but just aren't voting? Is that really where the attention ends up going, rather than the debates being a place where you're trying to switch a Democrat into a Republican or vice versa?
Yeah, in an election cycle like this one, I think the main issue is going to be getting your partisan voters out to the polls, encouraging them to vote, and related to that, trying to discourage or demoralize the other side's voters and perhaps persuade them that it might be best to not vote at all this year. I think that is a more plausible campaign strategy for both sides to engage in than to, say, try to turn a Republican into a Democrat or vice versa.
I'd like to talk a little bit about partisanship, who people just vote for. Is it ideology, or is it candidate, or is it just party? And so can you explain a little bit about that, like how voters are thinking now? And did that change at all under President Trump?
Sure. One thing that I think a lot of people don't understand about American politics is that it is true that we are polarized in a sense. That is, people do have very strong emotions about their politics. They feel strongly about their partisan teams. But we're not really polarized in an ideological sense. That is, most people, even people who consider themselves strong Republicans or strong Democrats, don't possess much in the way of strong ideological constraints. That is, even though they are very strongly attached to their parties, they don't necessarily know very much about actual policies or know very much about particular candidates and their stances. So I think that this is something that really hasn't changed over the Trump years. As I've argued before, really the most remarkable thing about 2016 was not the big surprises in the results, but really just how little things actually changed. Despite it being seemingly a very disruptive year, most people on election day ended up going with what their partisan inclinations were at the beginning, or would have been for any other set of candidates. If we look at the breakdown of, say, demographic groups and how they voted in 2016 compared to 2012, we see that the changes were fairly minor for almost all groups. We saw a little bit of positive movement for Trump in a small demographic slice of the country, but for the most part, people are pretty consistent election cycle to election cycle in terms of their partisan preferences. And, ephemeral political developments, they don't really have a lasting impact, including debates.
What is it that is sort of top of the list for this is why I'm a Republican, or this is why I'm a Democrat, or even this is why I'm staying in my pajamas and eating Oreos on this day and I'm refusing to participate at all?
Well, I think that there is something to the idea of that sort of these culture war or these symbolic issues are extraordinarily important, especially when it comes to symbolic issues that get tied into questions of, say, personal or national identity. So issues related to, say, race or immigration or these other issues that tend to provoke very strong emotions, that can tend to reinforce partisan alliances to the degree to which those are associated with these identity variables. And also there is a general sense, and I think there's enough empirical evidence to back this up, that, sort of the state of the country is going to either help or hurt the incumbent. I think that, if you asked me at the very start of this year if President Trump had very strong chances of being reelected, I would have said yes. But I do think that his chances have been harmed because of the coronavirus and the subsequent economic downturn. One can argue whether or not that's fair, but there is a degree to which, elections are the result of economic and other conditions nationwide.
As far as the importance of the debate now versus, say, 30 years ago or 40 years ago, has that changed at all?
Well, I don't know. It all kind of depends on how significant we think these have ever been. One of the things that we have consistently found as political scientists is that the way people approach politics, at the start of an election cycle is a pretty good predictor of how they're going to vote several months later. So, how much does any particular element of a campaign matter? It's always going to be just on the margins, because again, especially, and one thing that I think might have changed now is the speed by which events develop. That is, there could be a scandal on Monday, but by Friday, people will have forgotten about it because 10 other things will have happened over that period of time. So I think that even if something quite dramatic occurs, or one side gets what appears to be sort of a knockout victory in a debate or in some other event, I wonder how long that shock will appear in the public opinion data. I suspect is that it won't last very long, which would be congruent with things that we saw from earlier data from, say, the 1990s, 1980s that showed that election events, election occurrences could make some differences, but often those differences disappear after a short period of time. And I suspect that's still the case today.
Are we just saying, like, basically when it comes to issues or party alliance, like, these things are already settled? So debate, no debate, virtual debate, debate on Twitter, debate in-house, no matter what the format, that at the end of the day, we have what we have. We're close enough that it's going to be a matter of just the people in each party who weren't going to vote having, whether you get one more Republican versus the Democrat that stays eating Oreos versus, or the other way around, that's what's going to ultimately decide that?
I would say yes, that right now, I don't think that either side is particularly focused on trying to persuade people to switch teams on the basis of policy. I think this really is about trying to get your own people to the polls and trying to demoralize the other side. I don't think that at this stage of the game we're going to see much in the way of really, a substantive engagement with issues and discussing, how these different issues will play out over the next couple of years in either a Trump or a Biden administration.
So, final question then, when it comes to the debates and energizing those people that you're talking about, does that play a role in that at all? Like, maybe it doesn't change people's minds about who they're going to vote for, but if I'm somebody who, I was thinking I'm not really going to go to the vote, but I happen to watch a debate, do you change my mind on that stage there, or does it not even really play a role in engaging the disinterested voter who already knows who they would vote for, but they're just not thinking that they want to?
Well, I think it could potentially, if one side suffers a particularly embarrassing night or has a particularly bad performance, I think that in such cases you could find, certain people who might be subsequently persuaded to simply not vote if they found a particular performance to be sufficiently embarrassing that they wouldn't want to provide that person their endorsement a couple of weeks later. I think that is a totally realistic expectation. Thinking more broadly about why people would turn into these debates at all, I think one thing that a lot of people are not quite aware of, even if in their own behavior they're exhibiting it, sort of the psychological process of partisan politics in a lot of ways is not all that different from that of, say, team sports. That is, people get really emotionally invested in the outcome of elections because they feel like the red team or the blue team is in a sense their team, and it feels good to watch your team win and bad to watch it lose in the same way you would for any other type of, say, sporting event. And so in a way, when we think about how the public is approaching debates, we might be better off thinking about it in that sense, as opposed to one in which people are coming in open-minded and trying to decide, okay, which of these two guys has the better policy proposal that will maximize my utility, because I don't think that's an accurate description.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Like, I go to a Seahawks game, and even if they're doing terribly, there's no way you're turning me into a 49ers fan. I just may leave a little bit more depressed than I came.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, Dr. George Hawley at the University of Alabama, thank you. I really appreciate your willingness to talk about this very heated topic, but we'll see what happens the next few weeks. Take care. Again, I'm Allison Morrow. If you like this content, don't forget to leave me some feedback in the comment section, like, share, subscribe, and again, there are links in the description for how to support my work. There's Patreon, there's PayPal, and I will see you next time.